What if I told you the average backyard apple tree has probably cost American families more food, more time, and more money than it ever gave back? That sounds backward, I know, but for a whole lot of folks, apples have become the perfect trap. They promise old-fashioned abundance, then demand pruning, spraying, babying, and endless patience, while a handful of forgotten fruit trees sit quietly in the shadows, ready to outproduce them in the ways that actually matter. More fruit you can use, less work, fewer problems, more security when grocery prices keep climbing and store-bought produce keeps getting worse. And here's the part most people never hear. Some of these trees were trusted for generations before supermarkets trained us to ignore them. So stay with me, because number 4 thrives where most fruit trees struggle. And number 1 may be the most powerful survival fruit tree almost nobody in America is planting. Before we start, tell me where you live in the comments and subscribe, because one of these trees may be exactly what your yard has been missing.
Number 10. Quince. Now let us start with a fruit tree most Americans have walked right past without ever knowing what they were looking at. Quince. This old-world fruit used to mean something. Long before grocery stores trained people to judge fruit by how shiny it looked under fluorescent lights, quince had a place in the kitchen, in the pantry, and in the kind of household that knew how to stretch a harvest through the cold months. That is exactly why it matters again right now. Here's the truth. Quince is not trying to be a pretty lunchbox fruit. It is not begging to be eaten like a supermarket apple. It is a working fruit. When it ripens, it brings a deep fragrance that can fill a room, and once it hits the stove, it turns into something rich, sweet, and worth storing. Jelly, preserves, sauces, butter, paste, baked desserts, even old-fashioned fruit leather. This is the kind of tree that gives a gardener something usable, not just something to admire for 10 minutes before it bruises in a fruit bowl. And that is where quince starts beating apple in the real world. A lot of older growers are tired of raising pampered fruit. They do not want another tree that needs constant spraying, endless shaping, and prayer every time weather shifts. Quince has its own needs, sure, but it rewards the kind of gardener who thinks like a homesteader, not like a produce manager. Give it sun, decent drainage, and a little patience in the early years, and you get a tree that pays you back in flavor, storage value, and old-fashioned kitchen security. What makes this tree even more important is what happens if you ignore it. You stay trapped in the same grocery store mindset that says only the fruits on display shelves matter. And that's how families lose food wisdom one generation at a time. Quince reminds you that real abundance is not always soft, shiny, or easy to sell. Sometimes it's hard, fragrant, and built for hard times. And the next tree on this list may be even more overlooked because most folks plant it for beauty and never realize they could have been harvesting from it all along.
Number 9. Cornelian cherry. Now this one right here is the kind of tree that proves how badly modern gardening culture has failed people. Cornelian cherry. Plenty of folks in America have seen this small tree or shrub used in landscaping and never once heard anybody say, you know, that thing makes edible fruit. That tells you everything. We have been surrounded by useful plants and trained to treat them like decoration. Cornelian cherry has deep roots in old European and Western Asian food traditions, but in today's American yards, it usually gets reduced to spring flowers and pretty foliage. That is a shame, because this tree can pull more than one job at the same time. It can stand there looking respectable in the front yard, then quietly hand you tart red fruit for jams, syrups, sauces, and preserves when the season rolls around. That is the kind of double-duty plant a smart garden needs now more than ever. What I like about Cornelian cherry is that it fits people who are done wasting space. If a tree is going to live on your property, it ought to feed somebody, support pollinators, or earn its keep some other way. This one does that. It gives early color, it handles a range of conditions better than many fussier fruit trees, and it offers a harvest most neighbors will not even recognize. In a time when food prices keep climbing, that matters. Every overlooked edible on your land is one less small surrender to the store. And let us be honest about the bigger lesson here. The reason nobody talks much about fruits like this is because they do not fit the modern retail system. They are not mass-market darlings. They are not bred for shipping halfway across the continent. They belong to a different way of living, where people grew what worked, used what they had, and did not need a barcode to tell them something had value. So if quince was your first warning that old food knowledge has been buried, Cornelian cherry is your proof. The best producing yard is not always the one with the most famous trees. It's the one planted by somebody wise enough to see food where everybody else sees ornament. And in the next chapter, we're getting into trees that push this even further, because the next two do not just survive neglect, they almost seem to laugh at it.
Number 8. Jujube. Now we move into the kind of fruit tree that makes a tired gardener stop and stare. Jujube. If apples are the spoiled royalty of the backyard orchard, Jujube is the hard old ranch hand that shows up early, works in the heat, and does not complain. And that right there is why so many people overlook it. It does not fit the glossy nursery fantasy. It is not famous, it is not trendy. But when summer turns harsh, when the rain does not come on time, and when other fruit trees start acting like they need a private nurse, Jujube just keeps standing there, doing its job. This tree has been valued for centuries across dry and difficult regions for one simple reason. It produces under conditions that would make softer fruit trees sulk, stall out, or fail altogether. That matters more today than ever. A lot of older Americans are gardening in places where the weather does not behave like it used to. Hotter summers, hard swings, dry spells, strange late frosts. And yet, people are still being sold orchard dreams built around trees that demand near-perfect timing and constant intervention. Jujube breaks that whole pattern. The fruit itself is another surprise. Fresh off the tree, it can be crisp like an apple when picked earlier, then turn denser and sweeter as it ripens, almost like a natural date when dried. That means one tree can feed you in more than one way. Fresh eating, drying, storing, simmering down, tucking away for winter. This is not just a fruit tree, it is a pantry tree. It gives you something that lasts, something useful, something that fits a survival mindset far better than a delicate harvest that needs to be fussed over and eaten right away. And here's the economic lesson nobody talks about. The best fruit tree is not always the one with the prettiest catalog photo. It's the one that keeps producing when conditions get mean and your energy gets low. Ignore Jujube, and you may spend another decade pouring time into trees that fold the minute the weather gets rough. Plant it, and you start building an orchard that behaves more like insurance than decoration.
Number 7. Mulberry. Now let us talk about a tree that has probably been dismissed more carelessly than almost any other fruiting tree in America. Mulberry. Some folks think of it as messy, some think of it as bird food, some do not think of it at all. And that is a costly mistake, because mulberry may be one of the fastest ways to turn a piece of land into a serious food-producing space. Mulberry does not waste your time pretending to be precious. It grows fast, it settles in, and once it gets going, it can pour out fruit in a way that makes many backyard apple growers feel a little foolish for all those years of pruning, ladders, spray schedules, and crossed fingers. This is the kind of tree that speaks directly to people who want abundance, not applause. When mulberry is happy, it does not hand you a symbolic harvest. It gives you armloads. That matters for more than just eating fresh off the branch. Mulberries can be frozen, dried, baked into cobblers, cooked into jam, stirred into sauces, and fed into a whole homestead system. Chickens love fallen fruit. Wildlife benefit too, which can help pull pressure away from other crops if your land is planned wisely. In other words, mulberry is not just feeding you, it can help feed the whole rhythm of your property. Now yes, let us be honest, because honesty is what modern garden talk is missing. Mulberry can be messy if you plant it in the wrong spot. Put it over a driveway or close to a tidy front walkway and you may regret it. But that is not a flaw in the tree, that is a flaw in the plan.
out near a fence line, beside a chicken run, near the back edge of a property, or anywhere a little fruit drop becomes a benefit instead of a nuisance, mulberry starts looking less like a problem and more like a small miracle. And that is the deeper point of this chapter. Productive trees do not always look polished. Sometimes the best tree is the one that grows with grit, feeds more than one purpose, and asks less from you than the orchard industry ever wants to admit. Jujube taught us that toughness is a form of yield. Mulberry teaches us that speed and volume can change the whole math of a backyard. And in the next chapter, we move into fruits with even deeper roots in American memory, the kind that can feed a family and wake up a piece of forgotten history at the same time.
Number 6. American persimmon. Now we come to a fruit tree that should have never been pushed to the edge of American memory in the first place. American persimmon. This is not some imported novelty with a fancy label and a big price tag. This is a native fruit. It belongs to this land. Long before modern grocery chains taught families to trust only what could be stacked, waxed, and shipped across the country, people in North America already knew this tree had real value. And that alone ought to make every serious gardener stop and think. American persimmon is the kind of tree that humbles modern assumptions. It does not scream for attention. It does not sell itself with glossy perfection. But when the fruit is fully ripe, it becomes rich, soft, deeply sweet, and useful in ways that fit a real kitchen better than another basket of bland produce ever could. Puddings, breads, preserves, dried pulp, baked desserts, old-fashioned country recipes that fed people before food became a marketing department. This is the kind of tree that does not just give you fruit, it hands you back a piece of American food history. And that is exactly why ignoring it comes with a cost. Every year, a gardener spends chasing fragile, high-input fruit, and overlooking something this well-adapted to American soil is another year spent borrowing somebody else's food system instead of rebuilding their own. American persimmon rewards patience, yes, but it also rewards wisdom. Once you understand the tree, once you respect its timing, once you stop trying to force every fruit to behave like an apple, you begin to see what real abundance looks like. It looks local, it looks resilient, and sometimes it looks downright strange until the first good harvest changes your mind. There is another lesson buried in this tree, too. A lot of folks think productive means uniform, neat, predictable, and market-ready. That is supermarket thinking. Homestead thinking is different. Productive means it feeds your people, handles your climate, and keeps paying you back without turning every season into a battle. American persimmon fits that old wisdom better than most of the famous trees ever will. And the next fruit on this list may be even more revealing because it tastes like something tropical, yet it has been hiding in plain sight on American ground all along.
Number 5. Pawpaw. If American persimmon feels like a half-forgotten memory, Pawpaw feels like a secret this country somehow managed to keep from itself. Pawpaw is one of the strangest and most fascinating fruit trees a backyard grower can plant because it breaks the rules people assume are fixed. It is native to North America, yet the fruit tastes like it belongs in the tropics. Banana, mango, custard, vanilla, all wrapped into one soft fruit that most Americans have never even tasted. Think about that for a second. A fruit with that kind of flavor growing on this continent and still barely planted. That is not just unusual. That is a sign of how much knowledge has been lost. This tree carries a kind of old American mystery around it. It grew in river valleys, woodland edges, and native landscapes long before the modern food system decided what counted as valuable. And because it does not ship like a grocery store fruit, because it bruises, softens, and ripens on its own terms, it never became a supermarket darling. But that is exactly what makes it powerful for the home grower. The things that make a fruit inconvenient for industrial retail often make it perfect for a person growing food close to home. Pawpaw gives you something apples never can. It gives you surprise. It gives you a harvest that feels like you cheated the climate map. For an older gardener who is tired of raising the same predictable fruits everybody else grows, Pawpaw feels like discovering buried treasure in your own region. And once the tree settles in, it becomes part of a bigger vision. Not just orchard rows, but a layered yard, a food forest, a piece of land that feeds you in ways the store cannot imitate. Now, let us keep this honest. Pawpaw is not a lazy person's miracle from day one. Young trees appreciate some protection, good siting matters, and pollination can be part of the learning curve. But that is exactly why it belongs on this list. The payoff is not just fruit. The payoff is independence from the narrow imagination that says productive gardening has to look the same in every yard in America. So, if American persimmon reminds us that this land already holds forgotten abundance, Pawpaw takes that idea one step further. It proves some of the most remarkable fruits in the country were never missing at all. They were simply ignored because they did not fit the machine. And in the next chapter, we're moving into fruits that hit even harder where many families feel pain the most, in the wallet, in the workload, and in the daily fight to grow more food with less effort.
Number 4. Serviceberry. Now here is a tree that should make every backyard gardener in America a little uncomfortable, because once you understand what serviceberry can do, you start realizing how much space has been wasted on plants that look nice but never feed anybody. Serviceberry is one of those rare trees that manages to do both. It gives you spring flowers, strong seasonal beauty, and a crop of sweet dark berries that too many people still overlook. In other words, it earns its keep, and these days that matters. A lot of folks have been taught to separate beauty from usefulness, like a front yard is supposed to impress strangers, while the backyard does all the work. That is nonsense. A truly smart property makes every square foot count. Serviceberry fits that kind of thinking almost perfectly. It is well suited to smaller spaces, it handles a range of climates better than many fussier fruit trees, and when it fruits, it gives you berries that can be eaten fresh, baked into pies, cooked into jam, or frozen for later. What you get is not just a pretty ornamental, you get an edible landscape that pulls its weight. And that is where serviceberry starts quietly outrunning apple in the real world. Apples often demand your full attention. Spray this, thin that, watch for disease, watch for pests, then hope the weather cooperates. Serviceberry does not come with that same spoiled attitude. It slips into the yard, does its job, and asks you to think a little differently. Not like a supermarket shopper, like a land steward, like somebody who wants fruit, shade, pollinator support, and beauty all from the same piece of ground. That matters more than ever when people are trying to cut grocery bills without turning gardening into another full-time burden. Ignore serviceberry and you keep believing the lie that useful food plants have to look wild, messy, or out of place. Plant it and you start to see that one of the smartest survival moves is often hiding in plain sight, dressed up like a landscaping tree.
Number 3. Elderberry. Now we come to a plant that may be one of the clearest examples of how modern Americans have been trained to underestimate anything that is too easy, too useful, or too old-fashioned to fit the retail system. Elderberry. This is the kind of plant that should be in far more yards than it is, especially for people who care about food security, preserving harvests, and getting serious value out of rough corners of their property. Elderberry does not need to be the star of a tidy suburban catalog photo to matter. It matters because it produces. It matters because it can turn a fence line, a damp patch, or an underused edge of land into something with purpose. It matters because when berries come in, you are not just looking at a handful of snack fruit. You are looking at syrup, jelly, concentrate, freezer stores, dried ingredients, and the kind of home processing that used to be normal before convenience culture made people forget what resilience looked like. And let us tell the truth, nobody in the big box garden aisle wants to say out loud,
A lot of the best food plants are not glamorous. They are not marketed to flatter your ego. They are marketed weakly, if at all, because they do not fit the most profitable model. Elderberry is powerful precisely because it gives so much practical value without demanding that you fuss over it like a fragile trophy tree. It fits the gardener who is tired of paying more and getting less. It fits the household that wants options when store prices jump again. And it fits the kind of landowner who has finally started asking one simple question: if a plant can feed us, why are we not growing more of it? That is the lesson of this whole chapter. Serviceberry proves a beautiful yard can also be a productive one. Elderberry proves even the forgotten edges of a property can become part of your food system. Neither tree asks you to worship appearances. They ask you to think in terms of yield, function, and long-term security. And the next chapter is where this list stops being merely practical and starts becoming unforgettable, because the final two plants hit like a revelation once you understand what they can do.
Number 2. Aronia. Now we come to a fruit plant that tells the truth about modern food better than most people are ready to hear. Aronia. Most folks know it, if they know it at all, as chokeberry, and that name alone has been enough to scare people off for years. But that is exactly how useful plants get buried. Give them an unflattering name, let the grocery system ignore them, and before long the average family forgets they ever mattered. Meanwhile, this tough, cold-hardy, highly productive plant keeps doing its work for the few growers wise enough to pay attention. Aronia does not charm people the way apples do. It does not come wrapped in nostalgia, cider mill memories, and polished supermarket shine. What it offers is something more valuable. It offers resilience. It offers heavy clusters of dark berries, dependable cropping, and a fruit that was never designed to flatter lazy taste buds trained on sugar and softness. This is a fruit with backbone. Juice it, blend it, cook it down, mix it with sweeter fruit, turn it into preserves, syrup, concentrate, or freezer stores, and suddenly you start seeing the real pattern. The fruits industry pushed aside are often the ones best suited for people who actually want food security. That is where Aronia quietly outruns apple for the serious backyard grower. Apples ask for admiration. Aronia earns respect. It handles cold, adapts well, fits into hedgerows and edible borders, and keeps producing without demanding that you organize your whole season around its moods. For older gardeners especially, that matters. At some point, a person stops asking what fruit looks nicest on the counter and starts asking what fruit keeps feeding us with the least waste, the least fuss, and the most long-term value. Aronia answers that question better than most people realize. And if you ignore it, you stay stuck in the old trap of confusing popularity with usefulness. That mistake has cost families for decades. Because the best survival plants are rarely the ones with the loudest marketing. They are the ones still standing when the weather shifts, the budget tightens, and the store shelves start looking thinner than they used to. Number 1. Asian persimmon. And now we come to the one I saved for last, because this tree does more than finish the list. It exposes the whole lie. Asian persimmon. If apple has been treated like the king of the backyard orchard, then Asian persimmon is the quiet outsider that never needed a crown to prove its worth. Once this tree starts producing, it can make a person rethink years of gardening habits in one season. There is something almost shocking about seeing a healthy persimmon loaded with fruit. The color alone stops you. Then the sheer weight of the crop makes the lesson impossible to ignore. This is not some fragile little specialty fruit. This is abundance hanging in plain sight. Sweet, rich, beautiful, and useful in more than one form. Eaten fresh when soft, sliced and dried, baked, preserved, shared, stored. It feels old world and practical at the same time. And that combination is exactly why so many American yards have been missing it.
What makes Asian persimmon such a powerful number one is not just the harvest, it is the way it changes the grower. After years of being told that serious fruit growing must revolve around the same over-promoted trees, a fruit like this wakes people up. It reminds them that the orchard should serve the household, not the other way around. The best tree is not always the most advertised one. It is the one that gives beauty, food, storage value, and reliable payoff without dragging you into a constant war of spraying, correcting, and rescuing. So that is the bigger truth behind this whole list. The problem was never that America ran out of productive fruit. The problem is that families were steered toward the same narrow set of familiar trees, while tougher, smarter, more rewarding options were left in the shadows. Aronia shows you how much value can hide behind a bad reputation. Asian persimmon shows you what happens when a truly generous tree finally gets the respect it deserves. And if that does not make you look at your yard differently, nothing will. Because once you realize how many better choices have been sitting right outside the spotlight, you cannot unsee it. And that is exactly where the real freedom begins.
If you made it all the way to the end, you now know something most backyard gardeners in America still have not figured out. The most productive fruit tree is not always the one with the biggest name. It is the one that gives your family the most food, the least trouble, and the best chance to stay steady when prices rise and the system starts slipping. That is the real lesson behind this list. Quince, Cornelian cherry, Jujube, Mulberry, American persimmon, Pawpaw, serviceberry, elderberry, Aronia, and Asian persimmon all prove the same point. We were never short on better options. We were just taught to ignore them. While everybody else keeps chasing the same high-maintenance trees, you now know there are smarter choices that can give you more flavor, more resilience, more storage, and more peace of mind right in your own yard. And that is where real freedom starts. Not in a store, not in another expensive spray program, but in planting something once, learning how to use it well, and letting your land work for you year after year. So tell me in the comments which one surprised you the most, and what state are you gardening in right now? I would really like to know. And if you want more videos on forgotten fruit trees, survival gardening, and low-work plants that give back for years, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one.